Well, the school board that hired Pete Arredondo to be the chief of police of the Uvalde School District's 5-person police force held a public meeting tonight in Uvalde at the high school, the day after the Texas House of Representatives released a report that blamed Chief Arredondo, along with hundreds of other police officers, for waiting too long to enter a classroom to stop a mass murderer at Robb Elementary School.
Why the hell does he still have a job with y'all?
Chief Arredondo is on administrative leave at this point.
Are you going to fire him?
That will be a decision. We will take the report into consideration. It will be a closed session decision.
If he's not fired by noon tomorrow, then I want your resignation and every single one of you board members, because y'all do not give a damn about our children or us. Stand with us or against us, because we ain't going nowhere.
The school board that hired Pete Arredondo has been strangely protective of him and his job since he did not have the common decency to resign the day after the mass murder. Jasmine Cazares' 9-year-old sister, Jackie, was murdered in her classroom at Robb Elementary. Jasmine is a high school senior in Uvalde who joined us on this program last week. Tonight, Jasmine challenged the school board for the long list of security failures in the Uvalde school system that are described in the Texas House of Representatives report.
How am I supposed to come back here? I'm going to be a senior. How am I supposed to come back to this school? What are you guys going to do to make sure I don't have to watch my friends die? What are you going to do to make sure I don't have to wait 77 minutes bleeding out on my classroom floor just like my little sister did? I know there's nothing you can do to bring my sister back, but maybe, just maybe, if you do something to change this, you can prevent the next family from losing their child. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Costas.
Tina Taylor and her daughter, Maylee Taylor, a student at Robb Elementary, said this.
My daughter has something to say.
This was the last dress that all my friends saw me on. Most of those kids were my friends. And that's not good. And I don't want to go to your guys' school if they don't have protection.
And she's encouraging for her friends not to go to school too. Advocacy starts at this age. Leadership is standing up here and showing our children that that is not leadership. That is poor leadership.
The bipartisan report from the Texas House of Representatives is the most thorough report now available on the mass murder and its aftermath. The report indicates there was no chain of command for the 376 federal, state, and local law enforcement officers who showed up at the school. The report documents Pete Arredondo's failure to assume the role of commander, even though he co-wrote the procedural manual that automatically made him the commander of any school shooting incident. But the report also blames all of the rest of the police forces that showed up that day, all of whom had the authority to take command of the situation, which the report described as, quote, chaos. The report says the entirety of law enforcement and its training, preparation, and response shares systemic responsibility for many missed opportunities on that tragic day. The entirety of law enforcement. Pete Arredondo testified to the investigation that he did not know that there were any students or teachers alive or dead inside the classroom with the shooter. But police body cam video released by the city of Uvalde yesterday shows a 911 dispatcher telling an officer at the school that a child has been calling 911 from inside the classroom.
A child on the line.
Hey, what was that?
It's gonna be room 12. I will need this. He is in a room full of victims.
Full of victims. Child called 911. So the room is full of victims. What? The room is full of victims. Child 911. Child 911.
A child's 911 call from a room full of victims. And because of the police-created chaos at the school, there is no evidence that that child's call for help was relayed to the police officers, including Pete Arredondo, who were closest to the classrooms in the school. The officers who had to make the decision when to go into the classroom to try to kill the mass murderer. The House report even faults the group of police officers who finally did go through that classroom door, faults them for waiting too long to do it. Police slowly assembled 4 shields that they could use for protection when entering the classroom, but the first 3 shields that arrived at the school were not capable of going up against an AR-15. The final shield delivered inside the school was provided by U.S. Marshals, and it was the only one that was rifle-rated, a rifle-rated shield that could take on an AR-15. 30 minutes after that shield arrived, Border Patrol officers used that shield to go in and kill the mass murderer. And when they did that, none of those officers were injured in any way. The first thing that officers on the scene heard about the murder weapon, according to police body cam video, was, quote, "It's an AR." And none of the police officers in that school were willing to go up against an AR-15, even the officers who had assault rifles themselves. The AR-15 left 376 law enforcement officials in terror and chaos for 77 minutes. They were afraid of being killed by that weapon, and that is why they all violated their active shooter response training, according to the Texas House report. The AR-15 stopped them all in their tracks, and they did not dare go into that classroom until they had a rifle-rated shield to protect themselves from an AR-15. The report has a long list of factors that contributed in some way to 19 murdered children and 2 murdered teachers and a gravely wounded teacher who survived. The list of factors includes not keeping all doors locked at all times in the school because, among other reasons, substitute teachers did not have keys to the locked doors. The report neglects to mention that before AR-15s became easy to purchase over the counter in this country, no one worried about locked doors in American classrooms. The factors that led to the mass murder included people who knew the mass murderer and ignored the signs about him that were so obvious that his online friends and some of his former school classmates, their nickname for him was School Shooter. In a section about the murderer, the report says the shooting took place in his former 4th grade classroom. By 2021, at age 17, the attacker had only completed the 9th grade. He was quoted by a girlfriend as saying, quote, that he wouldn't live past 18 either because he would commit suicide or simply because he wouldn't live long. Online, he shared, quote, gruesome videos and images of suicides, beheadings, accidents, and the like. The attacker became focused on achieving notoriety. The attacker had no real expenses and hoarded money, telling acquaintances that he was saving for something big and that they would all see him in the news one day. The attacker developed a fascination with school shootings, of which he made no secret. Even those he personally knew in his local chat group began calling him the school shooter. None of his online behavior was ever reported to law enforcement. As soon as the attacker turned 18 on May 16, 2022, just 1 week before the shooting on May 24, 2022, he was finally able to purchase guns and ammunition. An online retailer shipped 1,740 rounds of 5.56 millimeter 75 grain boat tail hollow point to his doorstep at a cost of $1,761.50. He ordered a Daniel Defense DD-M4 V7, an AR-15 style rifle for shipment to a gun store in Uvalde at a cost of $2,054.28. And on May 17, 2022, he bought a Smith & Wesson M&P 15, also an AR-15 style rifle, at the same store in Uvalde at a cost of $1,081.42. His uncle drove him to the gun store to pick up his murder weapons. And of course, the owner of the gun store described the attacker as an average customer with no red flags or suspicious conditions, but patrons of the store who saw him told a different story in FBI interviews, saying after the tragedy that the attacker was very nervous looking and that he appeared odd and looked like one of those school shooters. Another described his all-black clothing as simply giving off bad vibes. So, someone who patrons of a gun store think looks like a school shooter has no problem from that gun dealer in Texas buying mass murder weapons. Tucked in the middle of a long list of factors that contributed to the mass murder, everything from faulty door locks to faulty police work, there is the single factor, the one factor without which everyone at that school would be alive today. This is not a contributing factor. This is the reason for the mass murder. The report makes clear that even if the door that the murderer used to enter the school was locked, he probably still would have been able to find his way into that school. If you change any one of those security factors at the school, the mass murder might still have happened. If you improve the police response to the mass murder, some of the victims might be alive today because some of the children died on the way to the hospital 80 minutes later than when they should have been going to the hospital. But some of those children were murdered instantly, and nothing in the police response would have changed that. The one factor in the report that was the decisive factor in this mass murder is on page 73 of the 77-page report. It says there was no legal impediment to the attacker buying 2 AR-15 style rifles, 60 magazines, and over 2,000 rounds of ammunition when he turned 18. The Republican governor of Texas and the Republican legislature have made sure that that mass murderer was able to buy those weapons. They've made sure that Texas mass murderers are the best equipped mass murderers in the world. And the last president from Texas, George W. Bush, willfully made sure that the assault weapons ban legislated by Senator Joe Biden expired after 10 years. After 10 years, when shootings like this were reduced by that assault weapons ban, the Republican President George W. Bush and Republicans in Congress decided it's time to make sure that American mass murderers remain the best equipped mass murderers in the world. They did that. Government, Republican government, allowed that mass murderer in Uvalde to plan his purchase of weapons of war to use for mass murder in his former 4th grade classroom. A mass murderer with an AR-15 walked into a shopping mall in Indiana yesterday and killed 3 people before he was killed by an unarmed 22-year-old man who happened to be in the mall at the time and was lawfully carrying his own gun. That is the very rare good guy with a gun story that the National Rifle Association and Republican politicians want us to believe is the actual solution to mass murder. Many of those people, many of those politicians are calling that story a success story for the good guy with a gun theory of defense. They don't seem to notice that they are accepting within their success story the idea of 3 people at a shopping mall being murdered by an AR-15 before the good guy with a gun does his thing. And I'm very glad that the good guy with the gun was luckily positioned to do that. But that was just a matter of luck. At Robb Elementary School, there were 376 good guys with guns, and they all, every one of them, to varying degrees, failed, according to the Texas House of Representatives report.